Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here together. And today we have the opportunity to share with two different books, the 3D Gospel, which some of you have heard us refer to, and I highly recommend it for those of you who are serving in cross-culture situations. It's a must-read. My wife and I have been serving in missions for almost 35 years now, and I was born in a missionary family. I grew up in a village. First time I went to the States, I didn't know about telephones, I didn't know about TVs. We have talked in the sessions prior to this, in the EMT Plus for Ethnos, in the last week actually, a lot about culture. And you may be asking yourself, why more information about culture? And I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but certainly I have, where somebody has actually said to me, somebody from North America, unfortunately, culture is irrelevant. This issue is not a culture issue. This is an issue of right and wrong. What you've done is wrong, and that's what we need to address. We need to address this issue. And you're like, what? Culture is irrelevant? And I know that culture is relevant because I happen to be a part of a cross-cultural marriage. And my wife and I have been married for 35 years, and she'll tell you any day of the week that my husband is not a typical American. I was born essentially in a village in southwestern Tanzania. I grew up in the Mambwe tribe, speaking Mambwe, Fipa, Swahili, and then English in the home. I grew up playing soccer as my main activity. I grew up similar to my friend Dr. Isidore here, chasing and hunting monkeys, keeping them out of our gardens. And so my worldview is very different than my wife's, who grew up in Seattle, Washington, Denver, Colorado, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and went to American high schools and American primary schools, and her worldview was shaped by the way she was brought up. I would like to read just one of the principles that are at the very end of this book, Africa, Friends, and Money Matters, which I also highly recommend. If you're part of Ethnos and you're going to be doing cross-culture ministry, this is required reading. You must read this and understand it. And this book is not written by a missionary or a believer. It's written by an anthropologist. And he made over 97 observations about Africa, friendships, money matters, and cultural issues. Just observations. If you're familiar with anthropology, which I'm sure all of you are, the study of man and the study of cultures, you'll also recognize that we need to come together as we discuss culture in a non-biased way. And this statement at the very end of this book, I want to read to you as we start out, because it kind of covers, it gives us a warning that is very valid. So on page 195, the 90th principle says, people of all cultures act logically unless they're mentally retarded or mentally disturbed. Does that ring a bell? So people of all cultures act logically unless they're mentally retarded or mentally disturbed. I expected more laughs about that comment. Thank you. Bring it on. The point is, as it says here, this observation points out that all people are logical and act in accord with their society rules. The outsider finds it strange, or if the outsider finds it strange or misunderstands only because he or she doesn't understand the people's logic. So when somebody behaves kind of in a weird way, go on the assumption, especially as a missionary, please, that they're not retarded or mentally handicapped. But they're coming in and approaching the situation based upon their cultural norms and understandings, which I can guarantee are very different possibly than yours. If you're a Westerner working in Africa, Asia, Europe, people have different views. So if you see an otherwise normal person doing something incomprehensible, take it as a sign of your lack of understanding, not of his or her strangeness, stupidity, or insanity. Thank you. That's the precursor to our lesson today, because, many times we immediately go into a situation and judge. We judge somebody's behavior based upon our understanding of culture, and we don't understand it. But this statement reminds us that we should automatically push it back on ourselves and say, it's me not understanding what's going on. Especially if you're a missionary going into a culture that is not your own. Because God asks us in the scriptures that we should be flexible and understand other people's cultures. The Apostle Paul said, be all things to all men, so that perhaps by some means you can reach some. But if you blunder into a culture with your ethnocentric, self-centered view of your culture, that everything is right in your culture, which is very common, unfortunately, with North America and Europe. If you blunder into a culture like that, then you're going to offend a lot of people. Obviously, things that we've talked about and shared in this group is, dress, food and drink, public behavior, and so forth. And there's a lot of tips that you can learn from experience that will help you perform better and be more respected and understood. But above all things, it's understanding that different worldviews, that are a lens. At the beginning of our lessons, we remember Brighton had these funny yellow glasses, and Amy and others, different glasses, giving us the example that Fred was giving us, that we look at the world through different lenses. Remember that, because that is a very important point. What is the lens that you use to see? To see what? The seen world and the unseen world. Think about it a little bit more deeply. These are the two dimensions that we're working with, the seen world and the unseen world. So how do I look at the unseen world as a person who essentially grew up in an African village with no white friends, no people from my own culture, literally for my entire childhood? I didn't go to school, at boarding school. I didn't travel to the U.S. except for grade 2 for 1 year, grade 7 for 1 year, grade 11 for 1 year, where I was thrust into an American school and had extreme culture shock and dealt with extreme issues. So I'm coming from an African worldview, having grown up and living in a village. So my culture is mixed. I think it's appropriate that I go through some of these points with you and teach some of these lessons because of my background. I kind of have a foot in both worlds. Obviously I appear to be a North American, white American, person, whatever you say that, because that's what I look like, and I speak the American English, and I understand the American culture because I've lived in that. I went to university in the U.S. I married a woman from the United States. But my upbringing and the formational years of my life was in a little village, where what my worldview, how I see the unseen world, is very different than my wife Tina, how she sees the unseen world. For example, I grew up, like Fred was talking about, playing soccer. I was on the soccer team, and everybody knew, even though I was a Christian, but I could see this worldview that soccer is a very spiritual thing. And everybody's going to have what we call dawah. And they would dig on the corner of the goalpost and put some charms in there that somebody would pay for. Our ball used to oftentimes go sleep in the graveyard before the game the next day. And then we would campaign for Christianity to be brought more into the soccer field. But I remember even at night when we would go to the village for Bible study, we would go to the village at night on Wednesday nights and sit in a little small room like this and discuss the Bible and different things in that context. It was very exciting. But on the way home, there were certain ways that we wouldn't go. Why? Because we were concerned with, if not afraid of at some level, the Katai spirit, which everybody in the tribe where I grew up knows exactly what I'm talking about. That's a spirit that resides in the fields, we call them mbugas, the open areas. And one of the things about the Katai spirit is you never shout in the evening time or at nighttime your name. Like I would never say Tina or Eric. Whereas during the day, that's how we communicate. You'll be sitting at the mission station where I grew up, and you'll hear echoing throughout the hills, Joseph Uwe. And you're like, what? Joseph Uwe. And I tell you, that voice carries for a kilometer. And Joseph, you better get back to who's calling you. But at night, you never want to do that because the Katai would steal your voice. You would become dumb. It never occurred to us that there was not a lot of people walking around without voices. So now I look back and say, hey, that would have been, empirical evidence that there is a Katai spirit and he's stealing people's voices because that guy can't speak. But there was nobody like that we could point to. We never thought of that as kids growing up. But that was the reality. And there are certain paths that you would walk on and not stop on because the spirits would come up. Certainly you would never go into a graveyard and stand on a grave because that spirit could come up into you. And many, many other things. That's how I grew up seeing the unseen world. Whereas in the United States, people look at the unseen world. For example, how do they view the devil, who is our archenemy, Satan, Lucifer, who fell from heaven? All of you know of the devil, perhaps have never met him. But certainly in North America, You know, and that's funny, but it's true. You probably never are going to meet him. He's only one. He's not omnipresent. And we're always like casting the devil away. Well, he's not going to. Maybe he's over in Iran, or he's somewhere in probably the United States in the White House right now. Who knows? He's busy doing something with big people, but he's just one. Now, the idea is when you ask an American, what do they think of the devil? They're going to draw a picture of the devil, red, with a tail, with a pitchfork, and a little horn sticking up, and they don't really believe in the devil. That's why we find that the worldview of the North Americans, perhaps the Europeans, has kind of watered down the reality of the spiritual realm. That is the method that the devil is using to attack, undermine, infiltrate, and destroy the church. Because we also become part of our culture where we don't really believe the spiritual realm is so important. So we draw pictures of him, we laugh about him. We have shows on television about, like, for example, Lucifer. There's a show I've seen on YouTube about Lucifer. Very good-looking, strapping young lad, and he's Lucifer. I've never watched it, but I'm thinking, wow, yeah, well, of course, that is probably the way the angel of darkness would present himself. Very attractive, very young, and who knows how that plays out. But if you ask somebody in a local village in Africa, like where I grew up, where Brighton grew up, who is the devil? Even if there is probably no such thing as an atheist in that society, but somebody even who doesn't necessarily believe or know much about the biblical devil, they're going to tell you about that force, that spiritual reality, something to be feared, something to watch out for. So it's a very different worldview. So we play games and mock the spiritual realm in the West, and that's how the devil uses to downplay it. And he infiltrates us by allowing us to think it's no big deal to play witchcraft games, Ouija boards, read Harry Potter, do yoga, do these things that are part of other religions that are very, very seriously worshiping other gods. We think that's no big deal, and we downplay it. And therefore, he has a foothold in our life and starts oppressing us. And then you might ask yourself, why is depression, anxiety, fear such a reality in the outplaying life of people in affluent cultures? There's no other country in the world as wealthy and affluent as the United States of America right now. That empire may collapse, but right now it's very wealthy. But you find depression, anxiety, fear at high, unprecedented levels. You go to an African village, I grew up one of the most happy people in the world. Thursday, we're going for wood. Grab the gun. Let's go. Take the dogs. We're going to hunt. We're going to eat fruit in the different trees on the way, and we're going to bring wood back for the family. That's how I grew up. Joy, peace. No thinking about poverty. Oh, my shoes are ripped. I'm wearing shorts that are torn. We never thought about those things. And you find depression. I didn't even know what that was until I moved to North America and started experiencing it. And also that whole reality where we suppress the spiritual world and don't believe in it in the West has also caused us to be very weak people in what we can handle. When we experience a trauma, it destroys us. My sister said my hair was too short, and you find that is just destroying who you are. Your self-image is blown out of the water. And you find that people do not take responsibility in the West because of their worldview. The classic example, which we all see and is actually listed in that book there, is the woman who sued McDonald's for having a hot cup of coffee burn her when she spilled it all over herself whilst driving a car. And she won the lawsuit. I look at that coming out of a small village and think, wow, they call us primitive. That's primitive. Take responsibility, lady. Coffee's hot. You're driving. It's not supposed to be between your legs as you drive. You hit a bump, But no, that was actually, people are like, no, McDonald's needs to tell people that the coffee's hot. What are you stupid? Of course it's hot. If it's not hot, I take it back and I want a better cup that's hot. And yet we'll laugh at the other culture because of their worldview, because we don't understand it. So we need to be, especially as missionaries, understanding both cultures. Remember what I said. When somebody behaves differently than what you normally think, reflect it back on you, especially as a missionary, that perhaps something about his culture, her culture, I don't understand. Let me learn about it and inquire. Rather than jumping to a conclusion. They lied, they stole, they cheated, And we heard lots of stories of different people behaving in certain ways. Tina told the story of the young Chinese foreign exchange student who moved into a room. And that story is found in the beginning of the book called Foreign to Familiar, which is also required reading if you're an ethnos missionary. Foreign to familiar. And he went into the room, his roommates weren't there, started immediately trying on the clothes in the suitcase. He was so excited. Wow, they're the same size. We can share clothes, which was so common in his culture. Only to be hammered by the North Americans when he came back to his room. What are you doing? You're a thief. All these labels. And it destroyed his entire college career that he was there in the United States, because his culture, he was attacked. He was shamed. He was, only for something he misunderstood. Please, let's not be part of the people that just destroy people's experience when they come into our cultures. And we talked about one of the number one ways in this day and age to reach people is through hospitality of those people that are displaced. There's never been a time in history where there are more displaced people. Even in your countries where you're working now, even in Malawi and Tanzania, tons of displaced people. And xenophobia is common in all countries. And yet we as Christians should not have that as part of our vocabulary or behavior, because we are called to see potential in people and love people, as we learned yesterday as well. So the unseen world and then the seen world. The seen world is influenced also by your worldview. The seen world, that's easy to explain. That's the things that you can see, right? So what you wear, what you eat, and many, many other examples. And in the seen world, we've talked a lot about dress, but certainly in the United States in the summertime, girls will dress in a way that is very inappropriate for this culture here, perhaps not the culture in Africa and Tanzania or Islamic cultures. You would have to be sensitive to the way you wear. And as a cross-cultural worker, Christian worker, you want to be sensitive to the fact that your goal is not to prove that you have the freedom to do whatever you want. Your goal is to prove that you want to integrate in their culture, respect their culture, and so forth. And that goes for people traveling to those countries. And I highly doubt that women from Iran or Iraq, whether they're Christian or Muslim, are going to feel comfortable wearing a string bikini on the beach in San Diego, California. And that's not what we're saying. You don't have to completely adapt. You don't have to wear a burqa when you're going to work in Iran necessarily, because everybody knows you're not a Muslim. Just be respectful about the way you wear things. And yet, don't disrespect the other cultures, and try to adapt to a certain level so that people can understand that you love them. So fear, shame, and guilt, three responses to sin in human cultures are guilt, shame, and fear. These three moral emotions have become the foundations for three types of cultures. Basically, in the world, there's three types of cultures. And we talked about hot and cold cultures, but this is a different way of looking at it, where you have guilt and innocent cultures, which are primarily in the Western nations. You have honor, shame, which is a mix of maybe Africa and Asia and so forth. And then you have power, fear, which is very much not limited to, but very much prevalent in societies like in the Amazon rainforest or in a village in Tanzania. Probably Brighton's culture would be power, fear at a high level, but honor, shame mixes in a little bit, and guilt, guilt and innocent probably is the one that mixes the least with everybody, but certainly power, fear, honor, shame mixed together. What is the meaning of these cultures? This is basically, the book has identified it as a response to sin in human cultures. How you respond to sin. So what happens to when a North American sins? You feel guilty. And that conscience, it's in many cases high prohibitive conscience, can even create disease in your life. It can even just really mess you up, and you're like a complete mess, but nobody knows that you sinned, But you're governed by an internal compass that is telling me whoa. And not that these other two do not have consciences. Don't hear me wrong on this. But it's more apt to be activated in a guilt innocent culture. Whereas in honor shame, you start looking around and see, did anybody see me sin in this way? And if not, I'm much better off. I don't feel as guilty about it. In fact, I may continue living that lifestyle as long as I'm not caught. When I'm caught, everything collapses in my life, because now I've been shamed. And you hear of many different cultures of how they deal with sin or disobedience in their cultures, and that is, honor, a guilt innocent culture. You stand before a tribunal if you don't repent. you're going to jail, and you must pay recompense. Fidia, what's another word for that? Recompense, there's another word for it, but I can't think of it. But Swahili, it's fidia. So when you do something wrong, like I steal 20,000 Rand from Steve, and I get caught, I'm going to need to pay him back 20,000 Rand, maybe even more. But in honor-shame cultures, if I'm caught, I'm going to apologize, I'm going to be shamed or whatever, but the likelihood of me actually paying back is pretty slim. And we struggle with that as Westerners, missionaries working in this culture, because it's like, okay, that's great that he's repented, and now we want to put him back as the pastor of the church after he embezzled all this money, but we feel like first he needs to pay that money back. And a lot of times the people we work with in these contexts are like, no, he's already asked for forgiveness, we've forgiven him. And there's a bit of a disconnect there. And we have to understand that part of that is cultural. And then power of fear. How's that response to sin? You're full of fear that you're going to get attacked by the spiritual realm. So there's a real motivator there for you to behave properly. So it's actually, these cultural norms are actually ways to look at sin. How do we deal with sin in a particular culture? Groupality, like personality, refers to an organized pattern of behavior characterized by a group. So, we like to say, let's not just lump everybody into the same box, and it's very difficult to do that in this day and age when we've got such a mixture of cultures. But the reality is that groupality is a real thing. Cultures and patterns of behavior that characterize a group, it's like personality. My personality is formed based upon my upbringing, my family, and personality can even include what you like to eat. If you grew up in India, most likely going to like spicy food. You grew up in a village in Sumbuanga region where I grew up, you're not going to like spicy food. You're going to like beans, you're going to like rice. And my wife discovered that when we were first married. She slaved in the village and made her own cheese, and then she made her own noodles, and then she made, took meat and grounded it and made mince, and then she made this lasagna. And I rock up as a new husband, having grown up in a village. I like rice and beans and shima and ugali, and she's like, I got this lasagna. I'm like, oh, can we not have rice and beans and ugali again? What? And then tears and subsequently, now it's 30 years later, we still refer to that incident. It's never gone, it's always there. And all I want to do is eat rice and beans. So, it's actually very interesting how she grew up in a context where, there's a variety of food. In the United States, it's probably one of the most variety places for food. Certainly South Africa is, and France and Europe and some other places. But you're not going to want to. People sit down and write menus, schedules of what they're going to eat. Who does that in an African village? Nobody. Tomorrow, kesho tutakula ugali. Kesho kutwa tutakula ugali. Tomorrow we're going to eat ugali. Day after tomorrow we're going to eat ugali. They're happy with that. People are like, I'm happy with that. Eric's probably happy with that. In Zambia, we hold up our hand and we say, these 5 fingers. And it basically means north, south, east, west, Shima is the best. Something like that. It's like, yes, we're proud of our food. And basically, it's true. None of this pizza, lasagna, all the differences. No, obviously, I'm joking. But, those things can create tension in a cultural context because you're like, the food is so blah. It's all the same. Well, yeah, from your cultural context. Sure. But who can afford to buy, all this mozzarella cheese and make pizza and have a huge budget in an African village? First of all, that's not going to work. So every society is a meld of all 3 dynamics, but we're going to emphasize one over the other 2 in each cultural group just to help us understand. Understanding a cultural groupality will create more effective platform for interpersonal relationships and the dialogue of God, man, and the belief system. This is our goal. That's why we're studying this, because we want to have a platform for interpersonal relationships and dialogue about God, man, and belief systems that are on the same page. We want to become on the same page. Yesterday, I had a very interesting experience. I went home and skipped out on the ministry presentations. Sorry, Kollide. You can delete that if you want. But I wanted to go take a nap because I was tired. When I rocked up at my house, there was a guy there in a big uniform. It looked like a Idi Amin type of a guy, strong, dreadlocks. And so I started chatting with him, and then he followed me down underneath the house where I was taking laundry off the line. And it was a little bit awkward. Somebody might have actually been nervous about it. I wasn't. I'm like, yeah, what could happen? We've been in missions class. Let me evangelize this guy. So then when nothing happened, I said, my name is Daniel. And he goes, and he looked. And then just something came into my mind, and I said, I wonder if his name is Daniel. Because why else would he react like this? I said, is your name also Daniel? And he said, yes, you've stolen my name. and he's a big guy. I don't want to steal anything that he has. So we started talking for the next 45 minutes and just talking about how he was a power lifter, and he had a gym, and he showed me pictures on TV of how his gym and how he's teaching people judo and all the strength, and how Daniel in the lion's den, that's why I'm so powerful. And I thought, okay, that's a good way, because what happened in Daniel in the lion's den wasn't about Daniel, it was about God shutting the mouth of those lions, which would have easily eaten Daniel. So I brought the point out, it's also strength up here, having faith, knowing God. God protected Daniel in the lion's den, and he's the one who was so strong. And us, we get old. I'm strong too, you're strong. I've seen lots of pictures of you, because he was pulling on a car with his dreadlocks. He was laying on the ground and had a wheelbarrow full of 400 kilos, he says, on his chest. And I've seen people like this, and it's very spiritual, there's a lot of demonic activity in that kind of strength and power shows. And he had a whole video about it he showed me, and I was thinking, here we go, right here, good example of missions and worldview. And what can we talk about? The purpose of understanding a cultural groupality will create a more effective platform for interpersonal relationships and dialogue of God, man, and belief systems. We must find common ground. We must connect. In my case, God brought him to me because of his name, and I'm praying for more opportunities to share with him, because our relationship has started. And he told me about how his gym burned down, showed me pictures even on TV, and how he wants to rebuild his gym. And somebody's helping him, and he's going to start soon. It's been 2 years and so forth. So you have that already platform to deal with. The systems through which people acquire resources influence how the group rewards or punishes its members. Think about that. It's not something we always think about, but how you acquire resources has to do with your worldview. How you acquire resources, it influences how the group rewards and punishes its society. In its society. All people must somehow access basic needs and necessities of life. Food, protection, information, health, and work, is essentially all those things that you need. Whether you're living in South Africa, you still need food, protection. Maybe you need more protection than I need in Tanzania, because South Africa is so dangerous. So you have a fence, you have a gate. All of that is influenced by your groupality. So primarily, how do these gatekeepers, we're going to call them gatekeepers, three primary gatekeepers of resources, how does that function in these three societies? Okay, the first one, formal institutions. In the West, the formal institutions are what protect you and help you get your basic necessities. That's why you find in the United States of America, which I'll refer to constantly because I have a US passport and I have 3 children there working, your gatekeeper of resources is formal institutions. So you go to university, you graduate, you have a certificate, you're pretty much guaranteed to get a job in the United States. Sometimes it's a matter of your choice where you want to work. And that's a good thing. In unemployment, if it reaches 5%, in many cases, people start rioting. Imagine 5 to 8%. Am I right about that percentage? Yeah. People riot. What? 2% unemployment. Our country is going to hell. What's going on? What's happening? And yet you live in Tanzania, you get 50% unemployment. South Africa, I've read statistics, sometimes even 80%. I don't know how true that is, but even if it's anything close to that, obviously people are surviving, so they're doing small businesses, trading, and living in a different way. It's not actually the same kind of unemployment that you would find in the United States. In the United States, if you're not employed, you have to collect money from the government to survive. There's no option of selling small things, and that's a cultural issue as well, the way resources are dispensed. Formal institutions help protect, and we also have formal institutions that allow us to give money, so we're more generous with our formal institutions. I mean, like we have the Lions Club, we have mission agencies, we have all these different things, so that I don't have to be so personal about giving Brighton money. Brighton's part of Ethnos. I'll give money to Ethnos and they'll give it to Brighton. You know, it's more of a casual take care of it. It's a formal institution. In honor shame cultures, you have human communities that regulate and govern the reality of the gatekeepers of how you get food, information, health, and work. You don't just rock up in a village and start asking anybody information in Tanzania. You will be highly suspected as being a spy. Where that idea came from, it's just intrinsically incorporated into the culture. You must first, and those of you who've worked in Africa know, you must first, before anything, go to the headman of the village. If he's not there, he will have an assistant. There will be a committee. And you present who you are, why you're there, and you get given a welcome. We've learned that in the Yao tribe, you don't just walk up and shake hands and start talking. You sit down first. They offer you a chair when they see you sit down. You don't say much. You just sit down. And then they start greeting one by one, by one, by one, by one. A lot of formality. And then after that, you can say, yeah, my brother's leg has just been chopped off. He's bleeding out. Can I get help? Oh, yes. But that's not, before that, you've said everything is fine. How's everything? Fine. Murishani, bueno. Habari ya leo, safi, mzuri, in Chewa, Muribwanji, bueno. You don't say, when they say Muribwanji, you don't immediately say, not well, my son is dying, what. That's the second awamu ya pili, we say, the second course of treatment, We'll talk about that later. So, and we've been shocked, because Tina and I ran a hospital ministry for 7 years before, at the beginning of our missionary career. And people are so tough. We had somebody come in to the hospital, and we were not medically trained, but this young child, probably under 10, had put on a ring from a bicycle cone, where down below, if you know anything about bicycle parts, but it looks like a ring. He got it on, and then it couldn't get it off, and then it created sore, and it started to rot and smell and stink, and she was going to lose her finger. And this is sprung steel. It's very difficult to deal with. That person would not cry, no emotion. This kid is under 10 years old. We'd be crying like a baby 2 weeks ago. And then I had to, cut it with a hacksaw, and then one cut wasn't enough. It was sprung steel. I couldn't get it. Had to cut another one and pull it off. And you're like, man, people are tough. And then, so human communities are what determine how you get food. How do you get information? I've said you go to the village chairman. In the United States, you just rock up and tell somebody what they want. You rarely even say hello in many cases. Hi, Brighton, I want to know about that plot of land you're selling. No. That won't work if you're living in Tanzania. First of all, you need to drink some tea. You need to talk about this. And because human communities are what govern what happens, not institutions. And that's why paperwork, many times missionaries have made a mistake by having memorandum of understandings that they write as if it's going to protect their relationship. And then relationships have gone, as we say, pear-shaped, because the paper's nothing. It means nothing. The signature means nothing. It's the relationship. I was once part of a situation where, because of a misunderstanding of our belief system, and that Tina will talk about a little bit tomorrow, many of the missionaries that were part of our group came against us. And not recognizing the folly of their ways, they went and approached the African brothers, whom I actually was discipled under them. My grandfather started the ministry, brought them to the Lord. We have history, 70, 80, 100, I don't know how many years of history, since the 30s at my grandfather. And some of these people who were still alive at the time, the missionaries said, Dan and Tina are this, and this, blah, 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 blah. They're just listening, And then they wrote a memorandum of understanding, this. Long story short, at the end of the day, they stood up in a meeting and said, if anybody ever says anything bad about Dan and Tina, we're throwing them out of our country. You will not be welcome in this country. You do not say anything about them. Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, whoa, and those people were shocked because, hey, we have an MOU, we have all these kind of things. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, 5 of those families had to leave that country. They were told they had to leave. There was no relationship. The MOU is still sitting on somebody's desk, means nothing. Vehicles confiscated, kicked out. Relationship is everything. You're governed by human communities, and that's what relationship means. Unseen spirits govern food protection, information, and health in the power-fear dynamic. And you find that the reality is why do some people go and sacrifice in a certain area? Why do some people go and pray? You know, and there's so many examples of how that is. We had a pastor who was so he was crippled. He's still alive, actually. He was discipled by my grandfather. Pipey was his name, and he was such a powerful evangelist and working and understood the spiritual realm. And the Catholic Church in Tanzania in the Rukwa region was for many, many years, and still is in some cases, very against the Protestant church movement. So they would, I have tons of stories about how our family was actually physically attacked and different things happened. I remember being in a choir in a youth group. We had just walked 40 kilometers. We're busy singing and preaching in a Catholic village, stronghold of the Catholics. And they started coming up when we're closing our eyes to pray and poking us with the thorns from the sisal plant, which is terribly painful. It has poison in it. And they're like, we're inoculating you, tunakuchanja. You know, we're giving you vaccinations against preaching this horrible gospel. We're Catholics, Hail Mary, and then poke. And so we started to learn you cannot pray by closing your eyes. You must keep your eyes open while you're praying. So we adjusted our cultural norms, which are not biblical. But unseen spirits. So you find this guy Pipey. This Catholic lady decided to go torch his house, burned his house to the ground, and 28 bags of maize that he'd harvested burned to the ground, all these different things. And he said, this is a spiritual matter. I will deal with it in the spiritual realm. He took a Bible, probably almost as big as Pastor Steve's Bible like this, and he went there and he placed the Bible symbolically in the rubble, in the burned area that was there. And he said, Lord, defend me, help me. My house has been burned down. The maize that I cultivated as a crippled man and with polio and my 7 children that I take care of has been burned. You, God, you see everything. Bring justice to the situation. And he just sat there in the ashes. What happened in the spiritual realm? You may not believe this. This is a story that came out of his own mouth. That woman had 2 children. One of them immediately went blind. Another one started convulsing. Her 2 children. And they became foaming at the mouth, convulsing. The one completely blind, couldn't see their way around the house. And she knew, because she's from that culture, there is something going on here in the spiritual realm. It must be that I burned down his house. And by this time, nobody knew who had done it. She showed up with her 2 children, weeping and saying, please forgive me, I burned down your house. Will you not pray for these children? And he said, call the elders of the village. Call the different people. Call your husband. Which she did. They came. She confessed to them what she had done. And they pronounced a judgment upon her. You will pay back the mzee, his 28 bags of corn. And he's like, no, I only need 12 for this year. 12 is okay. But, God will defend. And she says, please pray for my children. And he said, if God is the one who has caused them to be sick in this way, God will heal them. If it's not God, it's not. God will not heal them. So he prayed for them. And those children were healed instantly on that spot. Unbelievable. And I'm like, what? But God deals with things, unseen spirits. Unless a person can survive entirely alone, he or she must ensure a good relationship with at least one of these gatekeepers. If you want to survive in the United States, you need health insurance. You're going to go to the doctor and Tina stepped on a thorn and she ended up being charged $700 to pull the thorn out of her foot. It took about 15 seconds. I'm like, what? We started to negotiate. We went to another institution. We asked for help. And finally, they reduced the price to $200. $400. So, you have to have a relationship with an institution if you live in North America. If you live in Africa and Asia, you have to have respect for human communities. And you must understand that is a reality in that culture. And if you are living in power, fear, dynamic culture, Papua New Guinea, some African village, you go to visit Brighton, you need to be respectful of the culture. Find out, inquire, and so forth. So this is the first session that we're going to do. Each system has a unique protocol people must follow to remain in good standing. Follow the protocol of whatever system you're in. As a Christian, mold, understand, do research, understand the protocol of the context that you're in, and follow it in order to have a successful way to actually get food on your table, have protection, information, and health. In conclusion, a Westerner moving to Mombasa, Kenya, an American family, felt that living in this first of all, created a fake business, like, okay, I'm coming as a businessman, and it was obvious to everybody that he's coming as a missionary, and the business was a front. So everybody was suspect anyway in this Islamic community. Secondly, he says, I need to be safe from these people. So he got a house with a big gate and fence, you know, and so forth. Nothing wrong with gates and fences, but the whole approach. He was there a week, not even a month, big billboards, signs, and writing and paint on his gate. We're going to kill you, missionary. What are you doing here? Blah, blah, blah. Ended up leaving after less than a month. And essentially, as we say, like a dog with the tail between his legs running back to America. Bad approach, wrong context. Not bad person, but not understanding that, you know what? If you want to go work in an Islamic community, there's ways to do it. And you need to understand that culture.